One of the problems about monopoly is what the economists call regulatory capture. And I was involved in a little incident about this. So over the last year and a half, the Registrar of Copyrights, whose name was Maria Perdomo, convened a series of hearings in which musicians, Facebook, Google, filmmakers, all sorts of people came and talked about whether we should re-examine what is called the safe harbor provision of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Now, the safe harbor provision basically says nobody can sue Facebook or YouTube for posting content that they don't own. So a musician has no right to sue these companies because when Bill Clinton signed that act the day that Google went public, he gave them a pass. And she eventually concluded that, yeah, we should re-examine this. We should look at that. And she publicly stated that. 3 days later, she was fired. And Google got her fired. And the Wall Street Journal wrote an editorial and said, so you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to notice that the abrupt change of leadership at the U.S. Copyright Office is good news for Google, which aims to pay less for profiting from the property of others. This is what's known as regulatory capture, and anybody who spends time thinking about Washington knows that Google had the head of the patent office came from Google. The assistant attorney general for antitrust came from Google. The head of the White House technology office came from Google. All through the government. In my book, I just talk about 300 Google employees, which were essentially deployed through the government, and Eric Schmidt essentially acted as Obama's assistant chief of staff. Now, you would say, okay, well, now Trump's in and maybe it'll all be different. But that's not true. You watch, in the next 2 weeks, Google's favorite candidate will be appointed head of the FTC. They've been very clear that they want this woman in, and she will get appointed head of the FTC, which is the part that supervises the advertising business, which is what they were in, and they will once again be back in the driver's seat. So what has begun to happen in the music community is what I call a resistance. And these bands are saying, this is just not fair. We don't want our music on YouTube, and we want a way, when we tell you to take it down, we want it to stay down. And even though YouTube and all these other things say they can't do it, of course they can. So sometimes people say to me, well, what do we do about this? These companies are so big, and if I ask this group, hey, would you invest in a startup to be a search engine? We're going to go compete against Google. You tell me, are you crazy? Of course you wouldn't. So those of us who are old enough to remember when we did have a natural monopoly in the phone business, and it could be that Google is a natural monopoly, remember that in the '56 consent decree, Bell Labs had to license its patents to every single American requester for free. So as you well know, Bell Labs had the transistor, the microprocessor, the laser, the cellular system, the satellite system. Pretty much the core part of the digital age came out of Bell Labs. And so when they were forced to license those patents for free, out of that came Texas Instruments, Fairchild Semiconductor, eventually Intel, and even some of the employees of Bell Labs, like Shockley and others, left and formed their own startups. Out of that came Motorola and all sorts of other companies, ComSat, all sorts of, and there was a flurry of startups in the 50s and 60s based on getting free access to the patents. So one of the things I ask about in the book is, could it be that Google is such a natural monopoly that it should be regulated in that way, and that they should have to license for free their automated car patents instead of suing everybody else who tries to get into the business? Should they be able to have to license for free their patents on search, advertising, all sorts of other things, and they have, you know, probably 10,000 patents, and maybe that's one remedy. The only other remedy is to break them up, and I mean, let's be clear. These companies grew by acquisition. They did not grow organically. Google bought AdMob. Google bought DoubleClick. Facebook bought Instagram. Facebook bought WhatsApp. Amazon bought Zappos. Amazon bought Alexa. Amazon bought Twitch. I mean, so these are things where essentially the antitrust regulators were completely asleep at the switch. So I only have one final thought, which I've been lucky enough at the lab to spend a little time with Tim Berners-Lee. And he says that by continually decentralizing the web, we will unleash the next generation of technology, business, and social innovators. In particular, I look forward to new approaches to video, photos, music, and game distribution. He, as much as anybody, worries about the control of monopolies over search, social networks, and anything else. And so we have to really re-examine this, and out of that might come some new cooperatives like we're seeing in the music business, Odd Future, Mob, you know, and, you know, the history of cooperatives is pretty interesting. And so, and maybe in Dr. Levin's point of view, these are modular things that could be more resilient. So, thank you very much. Since I have just a little time, I'm happy to take a question or two.
Yeah, well, I've got one if nobody else is going to jump in. Our friend John Peribolo, of course, is not able to be with us at the moment, but for those of you who've been with Vanguard for many years, you know John's sort of been on the opposite side of some of your arguments to some extent, at least with respect to, you know, musicians should give away their content for free and make their money elsewhere, which I'm vastly simplifying his argument, but it is a little counter to yours. Do you know what John's position here might be?
Quite frankly, John has come around quite a bit. I mean, you know, the idea that Aretha Franklin should have to hump her 80-year-old butt around the country just to make a living when she has this world of music that people are continuing to listen to and enjoy seems to me silly, you know, and you know, the statistic I quoted of you get 1 million streams on YouTube and you get $900 is, to me, just not fair, you know. I mean, Google and YouTube are worth what YouTube alone is worth supposedly $12 billion. So one of the things these networks, social networks, have to do is start paying back some of the money into the content creation. CBS Corp and Google are both in the ad business. That's their business. CBS Corp's net margin is 11%. Google's is 29%. So what's the difference? CBS Corp spends a lot of money on content and creation of content, and Google spends none. Google is a free rider, and that's the difference.
Yeah, we certainly have some content creators in the audience too. Might be interesting to get together for lunch. John, we're out of time, unfortunately, but thanks very much.